Right now, there are not a ton of tournaments happening, which is fine because there are still other areas that you can improve upon in Yu-Gi-Oh! If you want to get better for when the season starts up again. In today's video, I want to go over 5 common deck building mistakes. These are mistakes that I see get made a lot, especially with newer competitive players, but please remember that making these mistakes doesn't necessarily mean you're a bad player or a bad deck builder. Everyone had to start somewhere, and everyone learns these lessons as they get better at Yu-Gi-Oh! While I can't give tips for every single deck in the entire game because some of them have different deck building rules than other ones, I can give 5 pretty useful generic tips for anyone that's trying to get better at deck building. The first mistake that I see a lot of people make, and especially when I look at my older deck profiles, I made this mistake a lot, is playing too many cards that are good in combination with other cards but are independently weak. There's nothing wrong with playing cards that are meant to combo with other cards. Modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Is pretty much built on combos. Sometimes those combos are huge ones that end on 5 or 6 negations. Sometimes they're just smaller combos that get your plays going. But when you play too many different cards in your deck that only work when you draw specific other cards and are basically useless otherwise, that's not good deck building. An example of this would be like when we saw a Grenmaju deck get second at a YCS and then very shortly afterward get first at a YCS. You're gonna see either one play any copies of Soul Absorption, despite the fact that the entire deck's goal is to banish a lot of cards and then attack with Grenmaju. Now, why didn't they play Soul Absorption? Well, it is good when you draw all of your banishing cards and your hand is already working, but it's really bad if your hand is kind of lackluster because the Soul Absorption doesn't do anything by itself. It needs other cards to work. One example from my own bad deck building in the past was when Gold Sarcophagus first went to 3 copies per deck after not being that for quite a while. I built a whole bunch of decks that played 3 Speedroid Terratop and 3 Gold Sarcophagus. If you happen to draw both of those cards, you could do some pretty crazy things. One of my favorite was banishing Rescue Rabbit with the Gold Sarcophagus and then using Speedroid Terratop to make a Levier the Sea Dragon and then bring the Rescue Rabbit back. That made a lot of really cool combos happen. You could special summon 2 Evil Swarm normal monsters and make Ophion. You could special summon 2 Dinosaur normal monsters and make Logia or Dolka. The problem was that when I played those decks, every single time I drew the Terratop by itself, it was okay but not great, and every single time I drew the Gold Sarcophagus without the Terratop, it was completely useless, just a totally dead card. Now obviously you can't always avoid this. There are cards called engine requirements, and what these are cards that you don't really want to draw but they're required to make something work. For example, to play Brilliant Fusion you have to play at least 1 Gem Knight in your deck, usually Gem Knight Garnet. The Garnet itself isn't very good. I mean, it's not completely useless, but you don't really want to see it in your hand. You just play it to send off of the Brilliant Fusion. I just mentioned Speedroid Terratop, which does also come with an engine requirement, Speedroid Takatomborg, and these engine requirement cards, you know, you have to play them if you want to use the powerful 3 of like Brilliant Fusion or Speedroid Terratop. Those cards are fine. I mean, it's better if you can find other uses for them, like Gem Knight Garnet can be used for a rank 4 monster, and Speedroid Takatomborg could be special summoned in some decks if they were able to make Levier the Sea Dragon even without Speedroid Terratop. The next common deck building mistake that I see a lot of is people building their decks in ways that never really acknowledge their opponent ever having an interruption. For example, you might build your deck and you might have a super consistent combo that goes off like 90% of the time with every opening hand, but maybe you didn't spend the time preparing against hand trap interruptions or preparing against board breaking cards like Dark Ruler No More and Evenly Matched. Now obviously you can't possibly prepare for every single hand trap and every single board breaking card, but at least acknowledging which ones are the most popular in the current format and then saying how does my deck do against those when I'm going first. Right now there are a lot of hand traps being played, especially for Adaemancipator, so you'll usually have to worry about cards like DD Crow and Nibiru and Ash Blossom, but also cards like Effect Failure and Infinite Impermanence. The important part here isn't trying to build a deck that beats every single hand trap and every single board breaking card. The important part is knowing how to react when your opponent actually does have those and how it affects your own strategy. Maybe cards like DD Crow and Nibiru hurt you really bad, so those are the ones you want to watch out for, whereas maybe Ash Blossom and Infinite Impermanence don't affect your strategy that much. When you're not going first, this might be a case of your deck being too normal summon reliant. Maybe off of one Agent Venus you can perform a huge combo that breaks your opponent's entire board, but what do you do if your opponent just has one random interruption to stop that Venus? Well, maybe you just pass, and that might mean that your deck isn't very good going second. You didn't build it to do that, which might be a huge issue in a longer tournament. You don't always win every roll. You don't always get to go first, which means if your deck isn't prepared to go second in game one, you might lose a lot of those game ones. In other words, make sure you're watching videos of deck profiles and reading up on topping deck lists so you can figure out which hand traps are the most popular right now, and you can change your deck list accordingly. Before I move on to the next 3 tips in today's video, I just want to say if you've watched this far, clearly you care about improving at Yu-Gi-Oh, which is great, because recently I wrote 2 different articles, one dealing with post-match analysis and one dealing with luck in Yu-Gi-Oh and how to use it to your advantage, and I wrote these for players that are looking to improve their game. Whether or not you want to get your first invite to your first regional top, your first YCS top, these articles are designed very similar to this video to help you out. If this video has been helpful to you so far, I can pretty much guarantee that those articles will be as well, so make sure to check them out after watching today's video. I'll link them in the description below. The next common mistake, which might be one of the most common mistakes that I've ever seen in Yu-Gi-Oh, is not preparing your side deck accordingly for the tournament. Now, I'm not talking about playing cards that are good against the meta. I think most people at least know the surface level cards that are good against the expected matchups. What I'm talking about is not preparing what you're going to side out and what you're going to side in against the matchups that you're expected to play against, especially taking into consideration if you're going first or second, because it's not the same. Look at it this way: you will play more games post side decking than you will with just your main deck. That is simply a fact. The only game that you'll ever play in a match without using your side deck or without having the side deck as an option is game 1. Other than some very unlikely situations that might not even happen once a tournament, like someone getting a game loss in your match, you will always be able to side deck in games 2 and 3, which means you really need to sit down and say, okay, maybe I'm side decking 9 cards going second that are great against the top strategies, but do I even have 9 cards that I need to take out? The problem is that if you don't spend the time to learn about your side decking patterns for your own strategy, you'll end up either having too many or too little cards against certain matchups. This is not good. You want to be prepared. Maybe you have 9 cards for the most popular deck of the format, but you only need 6 of those. Well, now you just open up 3 other spots that you can maybe use for generic going second cards or generic back removal, or maybe something that's only good going first, like a Pointer of the Red Lotus or Solemn Judgment. You don't need to know your side decking patterns for every single possible deck, but at least knowing like the top 10 most likely matchups and knowing what you're going to side deck when you go first and when you go second would be a really good idea before you enter any competitive event. The next common mistake is not choosing cards that have the highest available win percentage of all of your resources. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, I've actually made an entire video talking about this that's called Optimizing Card Choices in Yu-Gi-Oh! Deck Building, but what I'm talking about specifically is that given your budget, given your deck that you choose, what are the best cards that will give you the highest win percentage over the course of the tournament? This is the problem and why cards like Mirror Force and Magic Cylinder aren't that popular. It's not because they're terrible cards, it's not because they can't win, it's just that usually they're not the highest win percentage cards for pretty much any budget out there, because while those cards are very inexpensive, there are other better cards that are also not very expensive. Even something as simple as playing Storming Mirror Force over regular Mirror Force will give you a higher win percentage. Even if Storming Mirror Force isn't that great of card, it is at least in most cases better than regular Mirror Force. This is why, for example, Dark Mirror Force being a good counter to super heavy Samurais doesn't actually make Dark Mirror Force useful. I've mentioned this in the past, but basically, even if super heavy Samurais became a meta strategy, you very likely would not see Dark Mirror Force played at all. But how do we know this? Well, we know this because the super heavy Samurai gimmick is that they can attack in defense position. That's why Dark Mirror Force, in theory, is pretty good against them, because it's good against defense position monsters. In comparison, this should mean, in theory at least, that cards like Storming and Drowning and regular Mirror Force are all equally as good against attack position monsters as Dark Mirror Force is against defense position monsters. But we know that right now, at least, and for the last couple years, those Mirror Forces have not been very popular, despite almost every competitive deck using monsters in attack position. And this is what I mean by Dark Mirror Force probably would not be played even if Super Heavy Samurai were tier 1. It's for the exact same reason that the other Mirror Forces aren't being played right now and pretty much haven't seen that much play over the past few years. Now it's worth mentioning that the Mirror Force cards, for the most part, besides Radiant Mirror Force and Dark Mirror Force, all have at one point seen pretty high competitive success. What you should take from that information isn't that everyone is wrong for not playing Mirror Forces, because if they've seen success in the past, of course they should be playing them right now. No, that's not what you should be getting from this. What you should be getting is that win percentage for particular cards and decks and whatever is all dynamic. It varies from event to event, or format to format, or set release to set release, and the people that were able to top with those Mirror Forces at that time felt that they were higher win percentage cards than their other available options. It's very important not to get stuck on this card was good in the past, therefore it's good right now. Just because a card had a lot of success a year ago or even a couple months ago doesn't mean it is still good right now, because Yu-Gi-Oh! Is always changing, it's always evolving. Even something as popular and well known as Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring has not been competitively successful every single format that it's been released, and it's even not good in every single deck right now. We've seen Ash Blossom be really popular in some formats and then like a couple months later just being played in almost no decks. Ash Blossom, which is a card that should be good against a variety of matchups, isn't always the highest win percentage hand trap for a given format. Sometimes it's an easy decision. Comparing Mirror Force to Stormy Mirror Force isn't that difficult. Stormy Mirror Force is going to be better in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! In like 90% of the situations. However, sometimes it's a lot harder, like comparing Ash Blossom to DD Crow and Droll and Lockbird and Infinite Impermanence. If you only have space for 3 of these in your main deck out of those 4 options that you all believe are really great cards, which one out of those options and all the other hand trap options do you decide to play in your main deck or play at all? Well, that answer is going to change depending on which decks you're playing or which decks your opponents might play, and also what format you're in and what event you're going to. There are so many different variables that you have to take into consideration that it's not as simple as just saying Ash Blossom has been good in the past, therefore it's good right now. Make sure when you're deck building to really critically analyze every single card in your entire deck. Maybe something that was good last week or 2 weeks ago isn't as good right now because the metagame has shifted from week to week. And finally, the last common mistake that I want to mention in today's video is playing too many win more cards in your deck list. Now, if you saw yesterday's video on Pot of Avarice, you'll probably already know what I'm talking about. Basically, a win more card is a card that people refer to that is only good when you're already winning. I mentioned it in the Pot of Avarice video because for a lot of decks, Pot of Avarice falls under that category. It's only good if you've already comboed off, and if you've already comboed off, you're probably already winning, therefore Pot of Avarice might be a win more card in those decks. Sometimes cards will fall under multiple deck building mistake categories. For example, one card that is a win more card but also a card that is only good in combination with other things would be Altergeist Haunted Rock. That only happens to be good if you open the very specific hand of Altergeist Marionettor and Altergeist Multifaker. Now, why is this a card that is only good when you're already winning? Well, if you happen to open Altergeist Marionettor and Altergeist Multifaker, you're already probably winning that game. That's like the best possible opening that you can have on turn 1. So Altergeist Haunted Rock is a card that could help you really super combo off, but only in the hands where you're already drawing well. In contrast, when you draw Altergeist Haunted Rock, it is the worst draw that you can possibly have. It's almost useless when you're not setting it off of the Marionettor. What makes this different from Garnet or Takatomborg is that Marionettor is perfectly fine without the Haunted Rock. It is not an engine requirement. It is not a card that you have to play for a Marionettor to be good. Marionettor setting Protocol or Manifestation is already really powerful. Therefore, Haunted Rock is a pretty easy card to point to and say this is a win more card, which is probably why it hasn't seen very much competitive success compared to the other Altergeist trap cards. Please remember that just because you do one of these mistakes or all of these mistakes does not mean you are a bad player. Everyone has to start somewhere, as I said at the beginning, and we're always looking to improve. Even players that have won events are always looking to get better and better with each event because they just want to improve at Yu-Gi-Oh! Don't forget that if this video was helpful or valuable to you in any way, that the 2 articles that I'm linking in the description below will probably be helpful as well. I'll see you guys later though. Thank you so much for watching today's video. Goodbye.